We are a peaceful people. Struggle is with struggle, and we don't look for trouble. Just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. We ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one caress, not a blade of grass.
A pleasant good afternoon once again, everyone, and welcome to the final session of debates for today, where we will be wrapping up round one of this competition. And in this session, we have a group representing Region 9 and the other one representing District 11. This afternoon, our respected adjudicators are Dr. Valerie Gurusamy Smith, who will serve as our Chief Judge. She has been an educator for 45 years, and she has had the privilege to share her knowledge in the areas of mathematics, English A and B at the CXC level for approximately 5 secondary schools in Region 4. As a trained graduate teacher, she has spent over 25 years in secondary classrooms, and this was followed by her service transitioning to the tertiary level, where she spent 20 years at the University of Guyana as an English lecturer in the Faculty of Arts. As a University of Guyana student, she was the winner 2 years in succession of the Interfaculty Debating Competition. Dr. Gurusamy Smith represented the University of Guyana in the International Intercollegiate Debating Competitions in New York and the U.S. Virgin Islands. She's a national and international motivational speaker and is the founder and coach of Mastering the Art of Public Speaking and the Oral and Written Communication for Business Professionals programs. She's also the owner of the Gurusamy Royal College. Dr. Gurusamy Smith, being the pastor for the Graceful Church Without Walls with branches in Guyana, New York, Canada, and India, is involved in humanitarian services both in Guyana and abroad. Most noteworthy to her, she is a mother of 3 amazing businessmen. Our next judge this afternoon is Dr. Jermaine Hatton. Jermaine is a medical doctor and a University of Guyana lecturer in the School of Medicine in the areas of chemical pathology and academic writing. In 2019, Dr. Hatton was a member of the Guyana Youth Parliament, where he was awarded the Speaker's Award for his exceptional performance. In 2020, he represented Guyana and the Commonwealth Youth Parliament, where he acted as chairman of the Health Committee and promoted the important conversation on COVID-19. In 2022, the University of Guyana awarded him the Council of the University of Guyana Prize for the student that has made the greatest contribution to the university in other areas of university life. Dr. Hatton holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Medical Technology, as well as a Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery degree from the University of Guyana. He's currently reading for his master's degree in International Public Health. Outside of academia, he enjoys a nice hot plate of chicken curry, traveling, and sightseeing. Our final judge this afternoon is Mrs. Camille Doki Gorak. She has started her journey as an educator and visionary leader over 25 years ago after completing high school. Today, she's the director and chief executive officer of the prestigious Camille's Academy, Inc., one of the largest private schools in Guyana, with 4 locations and approximately 1,800 students currently enrolled. Mrs. Dioki Gorak currently holds a Master's of Business Administration degree, and she sits on the board of the Guyana Women Leadership Institute, Ministry of Human Services and Social Security. She's a past president of the Action Invest Toastmasters Club and currently serves as its secretary. Mrs. Dioki Gorak is a peace ambassador of the Universal Peace Federation Guyana chapter and is a member of the Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry Guyana, Manufacturing and Services Association Limited, and Women in Energy. As an educator and business executive, she received the Woman in Business Award for 2020 by the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry. She's also captured the International Award for the Best Service-Based Business, BizX America 2021, and the Guyana Manufacturing and Services Association Award 2023 for Innovation in Education. Our teams this afternoon. The proposing team is the Aishalton Secondary School Youth Group. The Aishalton Secondary School Youth Group is located in the Deep South Rupununi Subdistrict. The members of the group are students of the Aishalton Secondary School who have grasped the art of debating, from structuring arguments to delivering them convincingly to an audience. The primary interests of the group include natural resources, the preservation of the indigenous culture, and the development of the indigenous people of the Rupununi. Their first speaker is Mr. Isaac Atkinson, 15 years old, from Aishalton Village, South Rupununi. Their second speaker, Ms. Mishoni Pernambuco, 14 years old, from Shea Village, South Rupununi. And their third speaker, Mr. Rion Alfred, 14 years old, from Aishalton Village, South Rupununi. The opposing team this afternoon is the Future Diplomats Youth Group. This group comprises outspoken and confident youths who have the ability to connect with people from all walks of life. It aims to provide a platform to help develop critical thinking, communication skills, and confidence through structured debates on various topics. The Future Diplomats Youth Group fosters an environment in which opinions can be expressed, where there is respectful discourse and one can learn from differing perspectives. The group wishes to promote teamwork, research skills, and civic engagement, empowering young people to become informed and active citizens in their communities. Their first speaker is Miss Beyonce Roberts, 18 years old, from All Boys Town, Georgetown. Their second speaker, Miss Akira Hines, 18 years old, from North Commingsburg, Georgetown. And their third speaker, Miss Niambe Caesar, 18 years old, from Cummings Lodge, Greater Georgetown. Our motto for this session is, international law is sufficient to safeguard states from armed conflict. I now declare this debate open, and I call on the first speaker of the proposition, Mr. Isaac Atkinson of the Aishalton Secondary School Youth Group, to make his presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed judges and fellow debaters, good afternoon. Today, I, Isaac Atkinson, stand before you to affirm the motion that international law is sufficient to safeguard states from armed conflict. I will examine the moot from a geopolitical and legal standpoint, my second speaker, Mishoni Pernambuco, from a historical context, and my third speaker, Rion Alfred, will look at the moot from an economic angle. Allow me to define the relevant terms related to today's moot. According to Oxford Concise Online Dictionary, sufficient means adequate or satisfactory in amount, quality, or degree. Safeguard means to ensure the safety and security of something. States, sovereign political entities with defined territories, governments, and populations. The Cambridge Revised Online Dictionary defines international law as legal principles and rules that govern the conduct of the international community. It encompasses of treaties, conventions, customary practices, and legal precedents. Armed conflict, a state of hostility or active warfare between two or more parties, involving various forms of military engagement. We, the proposition, understand the moot as the existing international legal framework can effectively protect the safety and security of states from engaging in warfare. Esteemed judges and opposition, from a geopolitical perspective, international humanitarian laws was birthed because of the horrors of war. Amnesty International 2019 explains the Geneva Convention's armed international humanitarian law, or the laws of war, establishes what can and cannot be done by parties in an armed conflict. These laws seek to minimize human suffering and protect civilians, such as refugees and prisoners of war. Dear opposition, let me ask you this question. Why do you think Venezuela has not yet invaded Guyana as of today? Is it because of our vast armies and high-tech artilleries? No, my dear opposition. It is because of the fear of retaliation by Guyana's allies who adhere to international law and treaties. International law is what is currently protecting our beautiful Guyana. Our famed 1899 arbitral award, granted by the International Court of Justice, resolved the contention of land rights between Guyana and Venezuela. Nations worldwide support this binding agreement, denouncing Venezuela's claim to Guyana's territorial integrity. Esteemed judges, The International Criminal Court plays a significant role in addressing armed conflicts through various mechanisms, including diplomatic efforts, sanctions, peacekeeping missions, the international specialized courts to serve justice and hold perpetrators of crimes accountable. Examples of justice served include the ad hoc tribunals of crimes against humanity in the former Yugoslavia, genocide of Rwanda, war crimes of Sierra Leone, and the deadly armed groups in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Esteemed judges, statistics from the University of Southampton 2020 shows that only 14% of countries are in active conflict worldwide, especially those ruled by dictatorship governments. However, history has proven that dictators like Hitler's, Gaddafi's, causing political, economic, and humanitarian catastrophes would be indicted and justice served. International law serves to prevent such reckless ambition because while 14% of countries are engaged in armed conflict, 86% of countries worldwide are following the law. Think about it like this, members of the opposition. Just because a small number of criminals are operating, does that mean we should throw away the police force and courts? Esteemed judges and opposition, the Oxford Accord 2018 states that military alliances have always been a way to ensure peace and stability, such as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, 1949, and the present United Nations Charter with its Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. Article 5 of NATO Treaty states that an attack on one member is considered an attack on all members. Hence, in an event of armed conflict, NATO can deploy military forces to defend member states, deter aggression, or support international peacekeeping efforts. Tell me, smart opposition, which country is willing to attack another knowing that there will be a backlash from the other 33 NATO states? International law this is international law in action, like a reliable big brother or a friend who has your back. In closing, esteemed judges and opposition, international law is not only a legal, military, or political, but also has its socio-economic and historical precedents. As my colleagues will enlighten you, we at Proposition advocate that international law is sufficient for protecting countries from armed conflict, a future where the pen is truly mightier than the sword. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isaac. We'll now have the first speaker of the opposition, Ms. Beyonce Roberts, representing the Future Diplomats Youth Group, making her presentation.
Yes. Picture a world where the rules of engagement are etched in the stars, where the weight of international law binds nation in a delicate dance of diplomacy. Yet, as we peer beyond the surface, we find this tapestry of legality fraying at the edges, unable to withstand the tumult of conflict. Today, I implore you to embark on a journey with me, a journey into the heart of global governance, where we will discover the undeniable truth. International law, for all its grandeur, is insufficient in safeguarding countries from armed conflicts. Dignified judges, esteemed moderator, eloquent timekeeper, worthy opponents, and attentive audience, a pleasant good afternoon. We are the opposing team of the opposition. Of the moot, international law is sufficient to safeguard states from armed conflict, and this will be effortlessly understood as I redefine the key terms that certifies our stance. International law, as defined by the Legal Information Institute, is a set of rules or principles governing the relations and conduct of sovereign states with each other. Sufficient is defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, means enough. Safeguard, as defined by the Cambridge Dictionary, means to protect from harm. A state, as defined by Britannica Dictionary, is a community of citizens who identify themselves as a nation. And finally, armed conflict, as defined by Law Insider Dictionary, is a situation in which states or other countries fight against each other by use of military force. Firstly, I will expound on the historical and current global affairs that proves international law's failure in safeguarding states from armed conflict. My second speaker, Akira Hines, will identify the loopholes that undermines its effectiveness. And finally, my third speaker, Nyambi Caesar, will highlight the alarming fact that international law relies heavily on state compliance as it lacks a global enforcement body. And I quote, The Cold War was a period of geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union and their respective allies, the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc, that started in 1947, 2 years after the World War, and lasted until 1991, which resulted in the fall of the Soviet Union, along with the fall of many innocent lives. End of quote from the Library of Congress. The proposition may attempt to deceive us by suggesting that historical wars occurred due to the absence of international law during the Cold War and World War era. However, let us not be misled by such oversimplified assertions, as there are contemporary armed conflicts in occurrence, even regardless of the established international laws that are supposed to safeguard us from armed conflicts. As postulated by the Geneva Academy, and I quote, "There are more than 45 armed conflicts in the Middle East and North Africa, more than 35 in Africa, in Asia, more than 21, in Europe, 7, and in Latin America, 6, end of quote. The prevalence of more than 110 armed conflicts worldwide is a stark indictment of the inadequacy of international law in safeguarding countries from the scourge of warfare. Despite the intricate web of legal frameworks and treaties designed to promote peace and security, the persistence of armed conflicts across the globe underscores the limitations of these mechanisms. From the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of Africa, the failure of international law to effectively deter aggression and resolve conflicts leaves nations vulnerable to the desperate and devastating consequences of armed conflict. The harrowing reality of conflict zones, where human rights are trampled and where lives are shattered, serves as a damning testimony to the ineffectiveness of legal instruments in curbing violence. As we confront this sobering truth, it becomes abundantly clear that a paradigm shift is urgently needed in global governance. For example, dear judges, I'm sure you're all familiar with the current border affairs with Palestine and Israel, where as regarded and as reported by the Gaza Ministry of Health, have reported that there have been a loss of 34,183 lives and 77,084 persons woundedly and drastically injured. It is time for a systemic revolution in how we approach global governance, one that prioritizes proactive diplomacy, conflict resolution, and genuine commitment to peace. I thank you.
Thank you, Beyonce. We will now have the second speaker of the proposition coming from the Aishalton Secondary School Youth Group, Ms. Mishoni Pranambuku.
Esteemed judges and fellow debaters, good afternoon. I'm Mishoni Pranambuku, second speaker of the proposition. From a combination of historical and social advantages, will convince you that international law is indeed sufficient to safeguard states from armed conflict. ResearchGate.net 2021 show that respect for human rights and the rule of law is positively correlated with long-term peace and stability within societies. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, enshrines the dignity and equality of all human beings. Esteemed judges and fellow debaters, the benefits of international law extend far beyond the prevention of armed conflicts. International law promotes cooperation and dialogue among nations, fostering a sense of shared responsibility for addressing global challenges such as climate change, natural disaster, public health, and humanitarian emergencies. Esteemed judges and opposition, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, ratified by 200 countries, demonstrates the power of international law to mobilize collective action in face of threats to humanity and environment. Furthermore, the recent COVID-19 pandemic showed how the international community stands unified in events of worldwide emergencies, where countries shared information on medical resources. Next, the International Society of RedCross.org mandate to bring medical relief to not only those suffering in war-affected areas, but also to poor countries unable to afford basic medical supplies and services. Did you know, opposition, that any envoy with the Red Cross logo has international diplomatic immunity esteemed judges and Lord opposition. From history, CambridgeStudies.com, we have the major cases of international law to play a crucial role in mitigating armed conflict and promoting peace between countries. Importantly, the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, where the United Nations Security Council intervened through Resolution 598 for an immediate ceasefire, which ended the conflict. Next, the territorial dispute between Venezuela and Guyana over the Essequibo region was referred to arbitration, by which United Nations Secretary General in 1899 remains a foundational legal document. Additionally, international law dictates that Guyana treats the Venezuelan refugees in a human way, as we have been doing, giving food, land, medical services, and even cash grants. Another example is Camp David occurred between Egypt and Israel in 1978, resulted in ceasefire, resolved territorial dispute, and normalized relations. The three above agreements have lasted for decades, demonstrating the effectiveness of international diplomacy and legal agreements to resolving conflicts. In conclusion, esteemed judges and members of the opposition, because of time factor, we cannot mention the 1,000 instances where diplomatic pressure was used to incentivize countries through diplomatic channel to comply with international law, which is the opposite of armed conflict. Hence, we, the proposition, remain totally convinced that international law has been and continue to be definitely sufficient to safeguard states from armed conflict. I rest my case.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shoni. We'll now have this second speaker coming from the opposition Future Diplomats Youth Group, Ms. Akira Hines. Akira, you need to put on your microphone. We can't hear you.
So sorry about that.
Again.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed judges, Madam Moderator, respected opponents, good afternoon. It's an honor to stand before you today to dissect the moot international laws is sufficient to safeguard states from armed conflict. As the second speaker of the opposition, I stand before you to argue that international law, while essential, is insufficient to protect states from armed conflict due to its numerous loopholes and limitations. Allow me to elucidate my stance. International law undoubtedly serves as a crucial framework for maintaining order among nations. However, it would be remiss of us to overlook its inherent limitations and the stark realities of geopolitical dynamics. Firstly, there is a lack of enforcement mechanisms. The ICC, the International Criminal Court, struggles to assert jurisdiction and enforce rulings against non-signatory states or those refusing to cooperate. Inability to prosecute individuals from countries like United States, Russia, and China highlights the enforcement gaps. Furthermore, consider the ongoing conflict in Yemen, often referred to as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Despite numerous resolutions and appeals for ceasefire by the United Nations, the conflict persists, fueled by regional power struggles and geopolitical interests. The failure of the international community to enforce these resolutions highlight the glaring gap between legal frameworks and practical implementations. Esteemed judges, we must now move on to my second point. The international laws are subject to political interests of powerful nations. This clearly undermines the fairness and consistency of the international law. For example, the Syrian conflict has seen widespread violations of international law, yet decisive action has been hindered by political deadlock with the UNCS. My third and final point, dear judges, let us not forget the plight of Rohingya people in Myanmar, where ethnic cleansing and systematic human rights abuses has been perpetuated with impunity. Despite international condemnation and calls for accountability, the perpetrators remain unpunished, casting doubt on the efficacy of international laws in delivering justice and preventing conflict. How sufficient is our international laws there? Let us look no further than our own border conflict with Venezuela. On December decided Guyana's request for the indication of provisional measures in this dispute, ruled that Venezuela must abstain from taking any action that could alter the current status quo in the contested Essequibo region. In a report shared with CNN May 14th, 2024, the Washington-based think tank Center for Strategic and International Studies warns that Venezuela continues to play a dangerous game over its claim of the densely populated Essequibo. Venezuela does not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICJ. In fact, at least 35,386 dead in Gaza, 79,366 wounded since October 7th, according to Al Jazeera. These examples underscore the harsh reality in the international law, and it's often undermined by political interests, power imbalances, and institutional shortcomings. The United Nations, entrusted with the responsibility of maintaining international peace and security, has on numerous occasions turned a blind eye to the atrocities and conflicts, thereby failing to fulfill its mandates. I must conclude, dear judges, it would be erroneous to place unwavering faith in its ability to safeguard states from armed conflict. To truly achieve a world free from the scourge of war, we must complement legal frameworks with robust diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Akira. We will now have the third speaker of the proposition, Mr. Rion Alfred, coming from the Aishalton Secondary School Youth Group.
Honorable judges, esteemed colleagues and online audience, I am Rion Alfred, and it is my privilege to conclude my team's argument on the moot. International law is sufficient to safeguard states from armed conflict. We, the proposition, believe that international law is capable of safeguarding states from armed conflict through trade agreements that reap vast economic benefits, particularly in the context of Guyana and wider world. My dear opposition, International Trade Council, ITC.org 2018, connects the global business community, educational institution, chambers of commerce and industry, and government entities. When money and resources are involved, countries will definitely adhere to laws to secure their income. Therefore, when we talk about international trade agreements, we are referring to international law. Bilateral agreements such as Guyana and US ExxonMobil is a great example of how the United States would render military assistance to secure their investments on Guyana's shore, recently seen in the upgrading of our joint forces. Honorable judges and opposition, the collective power of CARICOM and Latin America was demonstrated on December 14, 2023, when Mr. Ralph Gonzalez, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and Grenadines, brought the government of Guyana, Cooperative Republic of Guyana, and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for a meeting at which the Brazilian president and Latin America diplomats were present. Armed conflict is not beneficial to no one. We have witnessed how international law and diplomacy when both the CARICOM bloc and Latin America bloc in support of Guyana. According to Invest.com 2022, international trade agreement serves as a powerful deterrent against military confrontations. Nations with strong economic ties are less inclined to resort in aggression, recognizing the mutual benefits of peaceful cooperation. According to Institute for Economics and Peace 2019, the economic impact of violence reached 14.5 trillion in 2020 to repair economies. Economic crises in countries such as Iraq, Syria, and Yemen and Afghanistan result in direct economic damage from the disruption in trade, investment, and infrastructure, existing economic challenges. Tell me, opposition, what country in their right mind would want to jeopardize their economic wealth with such chaos? However, we know that international law are effective in the 190 major trade agreements that bind countries to fair economies advantages. Some of these effective trade agreements include CARICOM, EU, and World Trade Organization that oversees global rules and resolves the trade disputes among its 164 member countries. In conclusion, in economics, armed conflict is not just a drain on human lives, but a black hole that devours resources, cripples economies, and stifles growth. Just think about the billions that could be redirected to defense budgets, to investment in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. To repeat, international trade law serves to protect countries against the scourge of war by trading tanks for textbook, missiles for medicine, a win-win for both peace and prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, Rion, for your presentation. We'll now have the third speaker coming from the opposition, Future Diplomats Youth Group, Ms. Nyambe Caesar, making her presentation.
Greetings, distinguished judges, esteemed moderator, fellow debaters, and attentive audience. As the third speaker of the opposition, I stand here today to reinforce our position that the moot international law is sufficient to safeguard states from armed conflict is profoundly misguided, considering the pervasive violence and instability that afflict our global community. First and foremost, let's acknowledge the undeniable truth that international law exists. It does. However, the mere existence of these laws does not guarantee compliance. We live in a world where powerful states often act with impunity and disregard established legal frameworks when it suits their interests. While international law undoubtedly wields significant influence in molding the landscape of global interactions, it is notably ineffective at averting the horrific threat of war and the carnage that goes along with it. The alarming fact that many countries do not comply with the law highlights how inadequate legal structures are as preventive measures against the horrors of armed conflict. Take, for example, the United Nations Charter, a cornerstone of international law designed to prevent armed conflict. Article 2, subsection 4 explicitly prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. Yet time and time again, we witness flagrant violations of this principle. The invasions of sovereign states under the pretext of preemptive self-defense or humanitarian intervention has become a troubling trend, undermining the very foundation of international law. Furthermore, let's not overlook the inherent limitations of legal enforcement mechanisms on the global stage. Unlike domestic laws enforced by a centralized authority, international law relies heavily on voluntary compliance and the goodwill of nations. The absence of a universal legislative body with binding authority poses significant challenges in ensuring adherence to the legal norms. Without a credible deterrence or enforcement mechanism, rogue states are empowered to act without consequence, hence sustaining cycles of violence and conflict. Consider the case of Syria, where the use of chemical weapons against civilians constitutes a clear violation of international law. Despite condemnation from the international community and calls for accountability, the perpetrators continue to evade justice. According to the United Nations Organization, estimates of the total number of deaths in the Syrian civil war are approximately 618,000 as of March 2024. Now, how can the proposition confidently purport that international law is sufficient to safeguard states from armed conflict when countless innocent civilians in various corners of our world are enduring unspeakable horrors due to its glaring ineffectiveness? Judges, how can we accept this illusion of security with the stark reality of mourning mothers creating their lifeless children and families torn apart by the brutality of conflict, all unfolding under the umbrella of international law? Allow me to conclude. My first speaker would have shared historical evidence and contemporary global affairs that unequivocally demonstrate the inadequacy of international law in safeguarding states from armed conflict. In addition to that, my second speaker would have highlighted the loopholes in these laws that undermine its effectiveness. And finally, I would have enlightened you on the fact that international law relies significantly on states' compliance as it lacks a global enforcement body. Their proposition. Let's acknowledge our responsibility as global citizens to tackle these shortcomings and work on promoting peace and fostering cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nyame. And we will now give the teams 5 minutes to prepare their rebuttals. And I'll ask our public relations officer, Mr. Yannick December, to take us through and give us the rules of the competition. Thank you, Yannick. At this time, we will bring an end to round one of the competition, and let me remind you of the groups which have successfully moved on to round two. Those groups are the University of Guyana Berbice Campus Orators Mastery Society, the Joshua Generation Youth Ministry, the Bijibel Secondary School Youth Group, Oasis of Optimism, Child Rights Ambassadors, Helpful Hands Youth Group, and we would have witnessed earlier today the Junior Chamber International Guyana. The winner of this match will be joining them moving on to the next round of the competition. Furthermore, congratulations to the members of these groups for grabbing their spots in the 9th Annual Youth Parliament. The 9th Youth Parliament will commence on August 12th, 2024, which is International Youth Day. Let me remind you this afternoon of our teams who are competing in this session. Our proposing team is the Aishalton Secondary School Youth Group, and this group is located in the Deep South Rupununi Sub-District. The members of this group are students of the Aishalton Secondary School who have grasped the art of debating from structuring arguments to delivering them convincingly to an audience. The primary interests of the group include natural resources, the preservation of the indigenous culture, and the development of the indigenous people of the Rupununi. Their first speaker is Mr. Isaac Atkinson. Their second speaker, Ms. Mishoni Prambuko. Their third speaker, Mr. Rion Alfred. The opposing team this afternoon was the Future Diplomats Youth Group. This group comprises outspoken and confident youths who have the ability to connect with people from all walks of life. It aims to provide a platform to help develop critical thinking, communication skills, and confidence through structured debates on various topics. The Future Diplomats Youth Group fosters an environment in which opinions can be expressed, where there is a respectful discourse and one can learn from differing perspectives. The group wishes to promote teamwork, research skills, and civic engagement, empowering young people to become informed and active citizens in their communities. Their first speaker was Ms. Beyonce Roberts, 18 years old. Their second speaker, Ms. Akira Hines. Their third speaker, Ms. Nyambe Caesar. And to remind you once more, our moot for this afternoon's session was international law is sufficient to safeguard states from armed conflict. Our timekeepers indicated that time is up. And as such, I will now call on Ms. Beyonce Roberts of the Future Diplomats Youth Group to present her team's rebuttal.
That, dear listeners, was a moment of silence for the countless lives lost and gone as a result of the failure of international law in safeguarding states from armed conflicts. Do we really want to stifle our conscience by believing that in this fallacy amidst us? Without recognizing and acknowledging these faults, it is impossible for us to acquire the revolutionary change our world so desperately deserves. The first speaker of the proposition stated that international law exists, as my third speaker would have mentioned. The mere existence of international law does not guarantee compliance. Since it looks at global enforcement, he also stated that only 14% of countries are engaged in armed conflicts. Judges, that is simply not true. I would emphasize on the fact that there are currently more than 110 armed conflicts worldwide, with insurance in my speech. Additionally, the first speaker asked the question, and I quote, which country is willing to engage in armed conflict? End of quote. Not permit me to tell you all of them, but a prime example is what I would have mentioned, Israel and Palestine. Moreover, judges, the second speaker audaciously stood to mention irrelevant concepts that has no relation with armed conflicts. She mentioned COVID-19, medical supplies, and the Red Cross Society, which might I remind you, have no correlation with the current issue of armed conflicts. The second speaker further mentioned that, and I quote, Diplomatic measures from the international law are effective in deterring armed conflict, end of quote. I ask of you, where are these diplomatic measures now in deterring these countries like Israel from these armed conflicts? Finally, the third speaker made reference to Yemen when speaking about international trade dealing with the economic crisis. While I get to gain, there is a current ignorance of how international law is safeguarding countries like Palestine. There is a current ignorance of how the international law is safeguarding the lost lives of those in Palestine. And I quote a lyric from John King. Why all the pain and suffering? Why all the senseless killing? Could it be that nobody cares? So many sons lost in the slaughter. Blood is running in the streets like water. A gun in hand knows no friend. Can you tell me when will it end? I thank you.
Thank you, Beyonce. We'll now have Mr. Isaac Atkinson of the Aishalton Secondary School Youth Group giving his team's rebuttal. Go ahead, Isaac.
Honorable judges, intelligent opposition, fellow colleagues and audience, a pleasant afternoon once more. We, the proposition, has expounded on a serious discussion on whether international law is sufficient to safeguard states from armed conflict. This moot was broad and encompassed many areas. However, we are cognizant of our own situation in Guyana, where Venezuela continues to raise the border dispute, which was settled in the 1899 arbitral award. The moot today, international law is sufficient to safeguard, or if international law is sufficient to safeguard our own country, it is valid. And with this, we the proposition sincerely believe that all existing international framework can effectively protect the safety and security of states from engaging in warfare. I have examined the move from a geopolitical and legal standpoint. My second speaker, Michelle Pernambuco, from a socio-historical context, and my third speaker, Rion Alfred, from an economic angle. We have chosen these three perspectives because we believe it captures what international law is. The opposition has presented their arguments, questioning the efficiency of international law to protect states from armed conflict. However, I will rebut these points and demonstrate that international law, while not without its challenges, remains a vital framework for maintaining global peace, preventing conflicts, and safeguarding nations. Now, let's delve into the specifics and address the points raised by the opposition. The first and the third speaker of the opposition argue that the persistent conflicts in regions such as the war zones show the weakness and ineffectiveness of international law. However, let me remind you of statistics from the University of Southampton, stated that these conflicts only make up 14% of war-affected areas, as I have stated in my speech, while the 86% or the majority of countries worldwide comply with international law. Just because there's a few lawbreakers, does that mean we should throw away the courts and police force? The existence of lawbreakers does not undermine the value of law. Rather, it highlights the necessity for stronger enforcement and collective commitment to legal norms. For instance, international backlash and sanction is imposed on Russia for its actions against Ukraine demonstrate how international law can exert significant pressure even on powerful states. The first speaker of the opposition the second speaker of the opposition also highlighted historical examples of war, especially in World War II or the Israel-Palestine war, as failures of international law. However, these tragic events might be, but they do not represent the enforcement of international law elsewhere in the world. As my second speaker highlighted, some countries have territorial disputes ranging from centuries ago, before international law was birthed after World War II. Hence, we can depend on the intervention of international community to bring about ceasefire and a peaceful resolution. The second speaker of the opposition raised the lack of strong enforcement mechanisms as a major flaw of international law. While enforcement is indeed a challenge, the evolution of international institutions such as the United Nations, NATO, and others aim to address these gaps. The UN peacekeeping missions, for example, have been instrumental in stabilizing conflict zones and protecting civilians. Furthermore, both my second and third speaker show how, according to our definition of international law, it includes trade agreements for economic growth or social environmental tragedies like climate change and COVID-19 can bring forth agreements between countries, which is a legal binding hence through diplomatic relations. Countries do not cooperate without resorting to this shows how countries cooperate without resorting to armed conflict. The third speaker of the opposition asserts that powerful countries often ignore international law, rendering them ineffective. Yet this argument overlooks that many dictatorship governments have never met with a glorious end. The establishment of International Criminal Court and the prosecution of war criminals set an important precedent to deter countries who step out of line, as I have stated in my presentation. Furthermore, the United Nations Charter explicitly prohibits the use of force except in self-defense. Are we to dismiss these achievements because of international enforcement is challenging? In conclusion, while the opposition points to challenges, these do not undermine the sufficiency of international law. Instead, they highlight the need for continuous improvement and stronger adherence to international law, which provides a critical framework for peace, stability, and cooperation among nations. By promoting economic interdependency, facilitating peace dispute resolutions, and upholding human rights, international law significantly reduces the likelihood of armed conflict. Hence, the proposition firmly restate that international law is sufficient to safeguard states from armed conflict, ensuring a future where the pen is truly mightier than the sword. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isaac. At this time, we'll allow the judges a few moments to compile their scores. And let me remind you, our judges this afternoon, we have Dr. Valerie Gorasamy Smith, who is functioning as our chief judge. She has been an educator for 45 years and has had the privilege to share her knowledge in the areas of mathematics, English A and English B at the CXC level at approximately 5 secondary schools in Region 4. As a trained graduate teacher, she has spent over 25 years in the secondary classrooms, and this was followed by her service transitioning to the tertiary level, where she spent 20 years at the University of Guyana as an English lecturer in the Faculty of Arts. As a University of Guyana student, she was the winner 2 years in succession of the Inter-Faculty Debating Competition. Dr. Gorasamy Smith represented the University of Guyana in the International Intercollegiate Debating Competitions in New York and in the U.S. Virgin Islands. She is a national and international motivational speaker and the founder and coach of Mastering the Art of Public Speaking and the Oral and Written Communication for Business Professionals programs. She is the owner of the Gorasamy Royal College and is also the pastor of the Graceful Church Without Walls with branches in Guyana, New York, Canada, and India. Dr. Gorasamy Smith is involved in humanitarian services, both in Guyana and abroad, and most noteworthy to her is that she's the mother of 3 amazing businessmen. Our second judge, Dr. Jermaine Hatton. Jermaine is a medical doctor and a University of Guyana lecturer in the School of Medicine in the areas of chemical pathology and academic writing. In 2019, Jermaine was a member of the Guyana Youth Parliament, where he was awarded the Speaker's Award for his exceptional performance. In 2020, he represented Guyana at the Commonwealth Youth Parliament, where he acted as chairman of the Health Committee and promoted the important conversation on COVID-19. In 2022, the University of Guyana awarded him Council of the University of Guyana Prize for the student that has made the greatest contribution to the university in other areas of university life. Dr. Hatton holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Medical Technology and a Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery degree from the University of Guyana. He's currently reading for his master's degree in International Public Health. Our next judge is Mrs. Camille Dioki-Gorak. She started her journey as an educator and visionary leader over 25 years ago after completing high school. Today, she's the director and chief executive officer of the prestigious Camille's Academy, Inc., one of the largest private schools in Guyana with 4 locations and approximately 1,800 students currently enrolled. Mrs. Dioki-Gorak currently holds a Master's of Business Administration degree and sits on the board of the Guyana Women Leadership Institute, Ministry of Human Services and Social Security. Okay, I believe the judges are ready. Let me just go to them. So I'll ask Mrs. Diokigora for her comments.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. All in all, again, it was certainly a great debate. While we would have seen great evidence, or lots of evidence of research, I've certainly had a few disappointments when it comes to the presentation. We have seen over 3 members in terms of their posture, pacing back and forth, or in a sense, rocking back and forth, which can certainly be a turn off sometimes for the judges. What I would encourage them to do as you are onto the national round, and certainly winners will go on to the youth parliament, try to practice the power pose. Now, the power pose is something where, you stand with that open posture, shoulders back, and your head held high, and just try to maintain that space, own that space. Let us see you demonstrate that level of confidence, because it certainly speaks volume when it comes to your presentation, and you can actually capture your audience attention. For the good things I would have observed, I've seen great use of rhetorical questions. There are many techniques when it comes to persuasive speech and writing. Debate is certainly one of them. I would have seen today a great use of visualization, which is another powerful tool used in debate. When I heard one of the speaker opening remarks were, picture a world with. That certainly had us thinking and really got us engaged. We will see the 3 R's demonstrated today: the research, rehearse, and remember. We'll see less and less reading from paper. I was looking for a local or regional example, and I've heard it from historian Alfred, where he referred to the meeting held, I think it was 9th of December, where it was chaired by the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, where they were talking about the Venezuela-Guyana dispute. So I'm happy to hear research were done basically locally and regionally, and not just on a broad spectrum and just go internationally. That is basically my observation here this afternoon.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Dr. Jabin Hudson.
Hey, good afternoon. I must say congratulations to both teams for being in this stage of the competition. I am impressed with what I've heard, especially from the Charlton Secondary School group. I think you held your own. You might have been paired with a team who you might see as older than you are, and maybe a better team poised to win. But you held your own today. The result will show what the results show, but I think you should be commended for that. I must say honorable mentions to Mr. Alfred and Miss Caesar. I think you were 2 very good speakers on your sides. Today, I must say I am pleased. We can do better when it comes to the rebuttal particularly. Let me just talk about that quickly. The point of the rebuttal is not to reiterate the points you've made. The purpose of the rebuttal is to highlight the points on the other side that you find fallacious and the reasons for that. The reasons for those points being bad, you have to highlight them based on what you have presented in your speeches. It's not about repeating what you have said, and we have seen that all day today. People just repeat what they have given already in their speeches and they call it a rebuttal. If that's the case, we'll just listen to your speech twice. Right? That defeats the purpose. Rebuttal is to rebut. The rebuttal is to attack points on the other side. Thank you very much. I am pleased with what I've heard here today. Charlton, big up yourselves.
Thank you, Jermaine. We'll now go to Dr. Valerie Gorisami-Smith, who will give her comments and announce the winners.
Good afternoon to everyone in and out of Parliament again. It has indeed been a quite engaging debate. It seems to be getting better. Let me speak that forward. That I believe the future debates that are yet to take place, based on all the constructive criticisms coming from our judges, I would advise that debaters to come would pay attention. Pay very close attention to judges' comments. They are very good for you to take note of going forward. So that's a bit we discussed this morning. If those who are listening are yet to come, listen to the comments. You will hear strategies. You will hear what a good rebuttal consists of. You will hear about your posture, your voice. You will hear about referencing material. All these things make up an excellent debate. Indeed, today I want to endorse all comments made by the two previous judges who spoke. I endorse all those statements. Indeed, the proposition and the opposition did their best. In my experience with debates, there are times when you know that the debate will go in favor of one team based on prevailing situations. And with such a topic, with all that's going on in the world with war and the impact of international law, we have evidence to show, well, it's not as impacting as we would want it to be. And therefore, it was quite a little difficult for the proposition to bring their case forward. Yet I can find angles. If I were to be one person in helping them to prepare, I could have given them some points. And that's what we as judges are believing, that if we get our hands into helping our debaters to prepare, I believe we're going to raise the bar of debating in Parliament by this in the speakers' debating competition. All this being said, congratulations to both teams. I'm truly impressed with the proposition team making effort, paying attention to their language, paying attention to lots of things that maybe other groups did not pay attention to. So congratulations to both teams. Congratulations to those who assist in the research. Congratulations to all those who put these speeches together. Indeed, I was impressed that I didn't have to make a comment, that reading was excessive. They did read, but we were not of the impression that a lot of reading took place. From the opposition, we heard lots of debating qualities and techniques expressed. And in saying that, let me announce the best speaker, as a matter of fact, came from the opposition. And the best speaker is no other than Miss Beyonce Roberts. Let's give her a rousing round of applause. She did well. She delivered. Also, I want to make mention that the third speaker of the opposition was a good speaker as well. There was clarity in their presentation, and those are good qualities to retain, and even better when you're coming again. So one team got 185.9 points, and the other team got 213 points. And the winning team, the winner goes to no other than the Future Diplomat Youth Group, coming out as winner this afternoon. Congratulations. And I pray blessing upon all the teams that are going forward, leading up to the finals. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And this brings down the curtains on round one of the competition. It has been a long, action-packed day, and we thank you, our loyal viewers, for staying tuned. On behalf of Speaker of the National Assembly, the Honorable Manzoor Nadir, and the Parliament family, I wish you in advance a happy Independence Day. We will probably be 58 years strong. So do take care and join us again next time.
We are a peaceful people. Struggle is always struggle, and we don't look for trouble. Just ask around.